Welcome everyone to the Montessori Family Life Series. We're so glad that you're here today. I'm your host, Lorna McGrath. And if you are returning, welcome back. We're so glad that you're here. If you're new, welcome to our broadcast. With us today, Margot Garfield Anderson. Margot has been with the Montessori Foundation for a very long time, doing pretty much every job at the foundation over that period of time. Mainly known for the conferences that she has put together and helped make really wonderful for all of us. And the other thing that she does is membership for many different things that we have, the IMC, the Montessori Family Alliance, things like that. And she's a grandma and has raised her own two daughters. So she's got some parenting and grandparenting experience. I also have Tammy Weiland from Maryland. She runs a school called Bay Montessori, and they have just opened up this week for on-campus programs. So Tammy, you're a mom too. You have a couple of kids, 9 and 11 or in that area?
One's turning 14 today.
Ooh boy, here we go. And so she also not only is a Montessorian, but has her own children that she is, working with and dealing with during this whole time that we've been in COVID. And Jonathan Wolf, who is a school consultant, conference presenter, an author. At one time in his life, he was a Montessori 3 to 6 teacher, which is so cool. And he's a dad and a granddad, I think, too. So and by the way, I have a couple of kids and one grandchild. So, so we're all here today to talk about playing together. And we wanted to sort of put it into 3 categories so you could sort it out. We don't expect that if you are at home and you're working at home, that you're going to take time out of your workday to do these fun things with your family. These are for times when your family would normally be together, maybe dinner time or a little after dinner, maybe on the weekends, those kinds of times. We don't expect you to drop your work and play with your family, although if you want to, you can. So we have categorized these activities as either physical activities, which means more or less whole body activities, creative activities, which means has something to do with the arts. It might be visual arts, it might be performing arts, it might be other kinds of creative activities. And then the third one is cognitive activities, things that we're going to have to think about or use our memory for or problem solve for, those kinds of activities. So that's how we're going to talk about these things today. And I think we'll go ahead and get started. I think we'll start with physical again. And would any of you like to get started on that while I type this question in?
Yeah, I don't know whether we talked about this last week, but some really fun games are just physical sort of challenge games. Now, I don't know the size of your family, but I'll share a game that's really kind of fun, especially if you can gather in other family members. You know, if you can make it a little bit larger. So picture that you have everybody in a circle, and you have a sock or a beanbag, doesn't matter. And the idea is you throw the sock to the same person every time. So I throw to Lorna, Lorna throws to Tammy, Tammy throws to Margot, Margot throws back to me. And invariably the sock will drop. So then you stop the game and go, okay, so what are some things that we can do as a family to make sure that the sock never hits the ground? And everybody shares ideas. Well, we look at people, we call their names, we get our hands ready, and you pick some new strategies. So it's sort of a problem-solving brainstorm. Then you start again and throw the sock until you achieve no dropping. And then you start the game again and you put a second sock in. So now 2 socks are flying around, all again to the same person. And if they drop, you go back, well, how could we solve that problem? So it's sort of like a fun team building, physical exercise. Another one that can be really fun, if you can put something together along the lines of what we call in the Montessori early childhood classroom a balance beam, which is usually like a 4x4 that the children can balance themselves and walk across. Well, the idea is the family, even if it's a family of 4, breaks up into 2 teams, one team on this side of the balance beam and one team on this side of the balance beam. And the idea is they have to cross by helping each other cross so nobody falls off the beam. It's just kind of fun physical activities that are sort of physically and intellectually challenging at the same time.
Yeah, kind of team building sort of things. That's
Yeah,
terrific.
kind of a physical challenge component where either not only do people have to exercise their physical awareness and coordination, but they have to work together.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, while you were talking about balance beams and other things, I was thinking, oh, I don't think we talked about this. You guys let me know if we did last week. Obstacle courses. And an obstacle.
Yeah.
Did we do that? Okay, because they can be either outside or they can be inside, depending on how big a yard you have or what your climate is like, or you know, those kinds of things. But that the balance beam reminded me of it. So
I would guess, to give people a resource for this, that if you were to Google physical team building games for children or for families, you probably, and we're not the first people to think about this, there's probably a huge resource of physical games you can play in groups with children.
Yeah. Tammy, Margot, either of you have something? Tammy.
Yeah, I was just going to mention, we've done it in our school as well as with my own kids, but using your body to make letters and then photograph it and spell your name out. So, you know, you would put your body into a C shape on the floor, and the kids love trying to figure out, well, do I look like a C? Take my picture, let me see. And then we would print the pictures out and they'd have their names spelled out in a picture. So a little bit of art and creativity along with the physical aspect of trying to get themselves into that pose. Younger kids, you could use it with the, you know, sounds of the letters, and older kids can actually do art. We've had like a Mona Lisa picture, and a couple of them have to figure out how to put their bodies in a shape to where when you take the picture, it somewhat resembles that piece of work. So that's another thought too.
Tammy, that reminds me, there's another game you can play. Picture 2 people. You do this in pairs, or you can do it in 3s. So they're holding on to each other, and the directions are, okay, have 4 points of your body touching the ground. So that would be, you know, 2 people, 4 feet. Then you go, have 5 points touching the ground. So that would be 2 feet and maybe an arm or something. So you can go to, you know, up to like 5, 10, 15 points touching the ground, but you can also go backwards. You can go, can you have 2 people and just 2 points touching the ground? So somebody's got to hold the other person. So it's kind of, again, a physical challenge that requires some mathematics or counting.
Yeah, absolutely. Margot, you got anything up your sleeve for this one?
Well, I don't have an activity, but I wanted to say to parents and grandparents about the physical that sometimes parents kind of feel either awkward about getting down on the ground and playing with their children. But remember that, you know, in the Montessori classroom, the teacher very often is sitting on the ground with the children presenting lessons. So they're very used to it. So they can help you get over that sort of obstacle in your own head about getting down. And for grandparents, I am forever on the ground with my grandchildren, whatever it is that we're doing. And yeah, it's not always easy to get up, but they're more than willing to help very often.
Yes.
But the thing is, there's not just the mental connection you're making with them when you're down on the floor with them, but it's that physical connection as well. So it's hitting a lot of their senses. And that's an important sort of way to really connect on how you feel the most comfortable. So I just wanted to add that in there.
You know, Margie,
And just
brought up another Montessori point that I wasn't thinking about. In some of these sort of physical team building games, let the children come up with the creative ideas for solving the problem. It would be so easy as an adult. Well, I want us to be successful throwing the sock, so I'm going to throw out 5 ideas. It's like, no, don't take the joy out of the problem solving out of the hands of the children. Just, zip our mouths up and go, so how can we keep the sock from falling? And give it a few moments. The children will come up with some clever things. Even 3-year-olds or 4-year-olds will come up with things. So don't steal the joy out of that discovery and problem solving from the children, even though we may have 15 ideas in our heads.
Mm-hmm. I think that, and that also speaks to, John, shared leadership. Children feel so good and important and valuable when they feel like the adults are listening to them and their ideas. And
Yep.
so I think that's a really important piece of what you're talking about, John, is that whole idea of them being leaders, facilitators of teams, that kind of thing.
Well, and if we want them to be motivated to play the game again, if we have micromanaged it or overstructured it as a parent or as a teacher, the children's attitude will be, so I'm going to have to perform for the adults and it's going to be all the adults' ideas. They're not going to be motivated if they haven't had ownership of the game.
Exactly. Thank you. I want to tell everybody that is participating with us today, I did write a question in the chat area. I usually write it in the question area, but I wrote it in the chat area this time. So look at the chat part of your control panel. It says, now that many schools are beginning to open on-campus programs, how are you feeling and what are your needs? And if you'll take a little time, sometime before we end today, to answer that, that will help our team put together some new webinars for you that will speak to your needs and your feelings during this time. All right. So let's see. Here we have from Heather. Let's see what Heather has to say today. I am an outdoor lead guide at a Nature's Way Montessori in Knoxville, Tennessee. We're hoping to be back to school beginning of August. I'm feeling optimistic because we are able to create distance learning this spring very successfully. We are also doing summer camp for 4 weeks. I'm wondering about strategies to keep outside spaces safe for our 160 student community. We have come up with many suggestions, but wanted to hear your thoughts on keeping play safe during the day. Anybody want to jump into that one? Thank you, Heather. I would guess that. Heather, can you comment on that? She says yes. Yes.
In a school setting?
Yeah.
Yes, in a school setting, right. And I think she's also, 160 is a lot of kids. I guess that would be during camp and also during regular school when it starts later.
First question.
You're opening now. Have you had to make any special arrangements about the playground specifically?
So yeah, the one thing we did is we just have our groups using different play areas, and because we opened with a small group to start with, we were able to do that. But we've really just expanded what you consider to be playground and using a lot of different open space. We are lucky to have 13 acres. But we've come up with some creative games and things for the kids, and we are just reminding them of their own personal space. We did just open yesterday. But there's a lot of ways to add creative play into the outdoors, utilizing lots of space. So, yeah.
Heather says that she has, at their school, they have toddlers through 8th grade. Now, I would imagine, depending on what your space restrictions are, Heather, that your toddlers aren't probably going to be outside at the same time in the same space as your 8th graders. I would guess that you're probably going to stagger the playtimes outside. I would also guess, and I don't know this for a fact, but you might need more adults on the playground during this time to help the children remember to stay apart or to lead different activities in different parts of the playground so that they can stay apart. So you might need a little more adult supervision on the playground than what we typically would do.
And we made a limit on sandbox. You can only have 2 in the sandbox instead of a lot. Often we would have kids pushing kids on swings. There's no pushing on swings. So little things of that nature. But we also went into this knowing that children are going to play and children are going to touch each other. And our parents know that we cannot keep children from touching each other in the buildings. So you do have to know where your kids are and the development that your age is dealing with.
Sure. I mean,
Well,
obviously you could tell an 8th grader, it's hard for them too, but you know, they certainly are hopefully a little more in control of their bodies and their movements than a toddler would be. So yeah, it depends on the age of the child. John, you were going to say something?
Well, to piggyback on what Tammy said about the sandbox, I think having different areas of the playground, and then whether it's a little sign or if it happens to be a firm surface, like chalk mark of the number of children that can be in that area, whether you have icons of children and or the number for the children who can't read numbers could really be helpful. I also think it would be helpful before the children, in the spirit of grace and courtesy lessons or circle times or community meetings, maybe bringing the children, together, spaced apart at the very beginning of play times, outdoor times, especially at the beginning of the year, to do reminders of like, so if you're going to cough, what are we going to do with our arms? Sort of taking them through the protocols of how we distance, how we make sure that nobody is spreading any germs. And so it becomes a little mini lesson as a reminder, but just to reinforce those safety behaviors outside.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
We found that our elementary kids are so excited to come back that they are willing to apply by any rule to be at school.
Oh,
Makes sense. Right.
yeah. Heather has another little thing.
I was going to ask Tammy, how many days are you asking the elementary kids to stop breathing?
All right, Heather, here she goes. Toddlers have separate time period, but everyone else went outside from 12 to 1. We have playground and 2 fort areas for older kids. We have 5 adults outside during that time. Okay, if you have toddlers in a separate place or a separate time period, that's great. Everyone else is out at the same time though. You might want to think about staggering the times and not having, if you've got, you said 160, I think, children. I don't know how many toddlers are part of that 160, but you might really want to think about staggering their playtime.
The other thing is really and truly remember that every state is going to have its own requirements and rules. So you should daily check if there are any changes for this, and then also sign on to the CDC website because they've given some recommendations and some updates on how to do things. I know I get alerts every time there's a new CDC requirement that comes out, and those are going to be your biggest benchmarks of when you can start changing things around a little bit.
Yeah.
And as our colleague Cindy Acker would say in California, listen to those recommendations and guidelines, but remember, you folks, Montessori teachers and Montessori parents, sometimes know children much better than doctors or legislators. So you want to listen to those guidelines, but you might want to make them stricter in some cases or not so strict in other cases to make them developmentally appropriate to children as you see them.
Yeah, and John, that reminds me, I get like a blog from Community Playthings, which is a really good company with furniture and things like that for schools. And they're, in a lot of ways, they're very geared to Montessori. And one of the last ones that I got actually was about, they took the CDC guidelines and then they gave some examples of some ways that you could, you know, abide by those and not, and again, I would agree with you, Jonathan, we have to think about our own children and our own space, but ways to make that work really in the classroom. And so Community Playthings is a very good resource, even if you're not going to buy furniture from them. If you get on their list, you'll get this blog, and it's really good. She gets good people to write for her, and they have good ideas. So you might want to check that out.
Well, and the other thing that occurs to me as you're talking about that, Lorna, and good school leaders, of course, will do this naturally, but maybe after the first week or two of back on campus operations, make sure in your very first staff meeting or program level meeting, you debrief the outdoor environment and the indoor environment. So what are you seeing? What's working? What do we need to tweak? Because teachers will have the most information about that.
Sure, sure.
And
And what have you observed is another way of saying what you just said. And that
Exactly.
whole observation thing is so important in Montessori.
Exactly.
You know? So we need to get their input from them.
Yep.
We have some other people out there besides Heather. So if anybody else would like to ask a question or have a comment, I also took a look at the chat area and I don't see anybody who has replied. So please do that before this webinar is over. We have about 20 minutes. So let's move to creative play and see what kinds of ideas we might have for creative play this week. Oh, Margot, you know what I'm hoping you're going to talk about?
Mm-hmm.
I'm hoping you're going to talk about the flamingos that are behind you.
So we live in southwest Florida. And when I moved down here, I just became absolutely enamored with the idea of pink flamingos. And my grandchildren all know of my love for flamingos. So what my children did for Mother's Day last year was they each did handprints of my 4 granddaughters, and then they turned those handprints into flamingos. And then during COVID, I gave the girls all a challenge to write their names in their best penmanship and take a picture of it with their iPads or phones, whatever, and send it to me. And then I printed it out, and then I affixed it to each one so I would know whose handprint it was. And then we have coming a big canvas print of the 4 of them, and I go by Grammy's flock of 4 because I have 4 granddaughters, and my daughter has one of those Cricut machines, and she's making a big decal for the wall that'll say Grammy's flock of 4. So it's been a family project at a distance, and it's involved everybody, and it's been creative, and there was a little bit of a challenge to it, and you know who would be the first one, and so it became a really fun thing for us to do. And I've dedicated this room to some of their artwork and other projects we've done. But two other really fun projects. One you can do as a family project, or you can kind of set the children up to do this all by themselves from the age of 3 on. You can do this outside so they don't get stuff on the floor, or if you have a play space that you do arts and crafts in. And that's taking coffee filters, paper coffee filters, and magic markers and foam brushes, and have them, they don't have to do any kind of pattern or anything like that. They can do just random colors and then you give them foam brushes and water, and they just smear over what they've done, and you let them dry and spray them with spray starch, or if you've got liquid starch, you can starch them, and then you can put them on some mounting board. And we got that project off of Pinterest because I had introduced all of my grandchildren to the artwork of Dale Chihuly, who is an American glass blower who does these sea foams and just organic shapes. And this was how you can introduce some artists of America to your children in very small bits. Two of my grandchildren went through 100 coffee filters over the course of 4 or 5 days. They were so into this project. It was crazy. They just kept doing it and watching the colors bleeding, and they were just fascinated by it. And so we mounted it all on foam core, and we put it on the wall in their play area. And so they have that. The other group was my granddaughter was so upset when I told her, after she had spent an hour on one coffee filter doing the design, when I told her, now we're going to smear it with water, and she burst out in tears. I don't want to ruin it. It's like, no problem. Don't have to do it. So we don't, we go into it very open-minded, and remember, all of your children and grandchildren have different learning styles and different ones of their senses that they connect to with art. So if they want to do it on their own, let them go. Coffee filters are cheap, and magic markers everybody has, and it's great for those that are dying out, drying up, because the water revives them. So that was a really fun and easy one, and a great family project. And I'm doing this summer. And again, this is even going to involve my son-in-laws and everybody. We're going to go up north to visit with them, all things being considered. And I have a giant tub of mosaic tiles. And we're going to make a form and bring it up. And then as we go to the two different households, everybody will have community time to lay the tiles on the design that we have done. And then we'll bring it home and we'll grout it, and we'll put it in our yard as a decoration. And it'll be our family project that we've done over the course of the summer. And this is, again, something children can 3 or 4 tiles at a time, or the family can do it like a puzzle. So it's got some of that cognitive sense in it, figuring out where colors go, and we'll make the patterns, simple enough. But that way you're involving everybody, and you don't have to have a lot of artistic skill to put something like that into play. And then when you're done, you have a fun piece to put in your garden if you have one, or hang it up, or use it as a tabletop. Again, Pinterest is a family's best friend for all kinds of Montessori-inspired art projects. They'll send you 20 or 30 pins a day if you put in what you're interested in doing. So it could really, really keep you creative on rainy days, or just days you want them to be messy outside.
Thank you.
Margot, I'd like to attend your art class.
I know, that's what I was thinking. She needs to have a show that's all her own, that's about art and art activities.
So when I was hearing her talk, I was thinking about simple slime making. There's so much of that out there these days, and the kids love that. So it goes right along with a lot of the things you were talking about.
Science project also. What I try to do I did this with my children, and I did this with my grandchildren. Even though it's a fun and creative thing, I don't overload them on the teachable moments, but I'll just slip 1 or 2 little things in there and ask them a question to get them talking while we're working on these projects. Because as they're being creative, they're loosening up and they're willing to share. So you can sort of lead them gently to steer the conversation and have them engage with you on those kinds of things.
So Margot, I always thought that the shortage of American coffee filters was due to COVID-19. Now I see it's your grandchildren.
It is. It is. Yep. But we
Okay,
hope
folks,
to have them and have some fun.
I'm gonna ask our participants. One participant told me that the chat session wasn't showing up on their computer, so they didn't get my question. So I just copied and pasted it into the questions area to answer that person's questions, and I think I sent it to everyone. So let me know if you received the question about school opening and what your feelings are and what your thoughts are. Okay, somebody let me know in the questions area. All right, anybody else have creative activities that they want to share, or should we go on to more cognitive type activities? Okay, let's go on to cognitive. And this is where we get everybody thinking. And I want to just start again and see if I remember from last week. And now we're going to know really how good my memory is. I know that we mentioned board games, but I'm not sure if we mentioned puzzles, jigsaw puzzles. So tell me, gang, did we? No? Good.
Briefly.
Jigsaw puzzles are a wonderful, wonderful activity. Some of us, like me, love them and have always loved them. And they come, you know, for children really little with great big giant pieces. They'll have these big floor puzzles that you can do, or, you know, and then they get smaller and smaller and smaller as children grow and their visual sense is more honed. And then guess what? When you get to be 101, like my mother-in-law is, the pieces get bigger again so that you can see them and put them together. So jigsaw puzzles are great. They're very, you see patterns. It helps people see patterns. It's sort of mathematical in a way. It's good preparation for reading. It's problem solving when you have to think about, well, what colors are all the same, and you sort out the pieces. And you can do this with your family. Now, if you have a 1,000-piece puzzle, you're not going to want to do that all in one sitting. So don't think that that's going to happen in one sitting. But we always had a space where we could leave a puzzle out for a week or more, depending on what it was, and people would just gather around, you know, at different times to put in a piece or two, talk with somebody about it. And that's the other nice thing is when you're doing puzzles, you can talk to each other and just enjoy each other's company. So I wanted to mention puzzles to you all. Anybody else have anything?
Yeah.
Lorna, I can create lots of puzzles with you because Michael and I usually have a puzzle set up on a table as well. And we've had some real challenging ones. And then what we do is when we go up north, we bring them and we trade because both of our families love to puzzle.
Yeah.
So it's become, we send pictures of them when we're done, and the kids are all like, oh, I can't wait to try that one. So again, you know, it's another way to connect, which is so important.
Yeah.
So I've got sort of a crossover between the creative and the cognitive, Lorna, which is writing a story together as a family.
Okay.
So everybody gets to see me put my colleagues on the spot here because we're going to demonstrate this here. So,
Oh boy.
so once upon a time there were two, Lorna. Once upon a time there were two
Rabbits, and one was the mama rabbit and the other one was the baby rabbit. And they were going to go on an adventure, Margot.
But first, they had to stop at every house along the way and nibble on the fresh spring grass and leave their little trail behind them when they were gone. And next, they went on to Tammy.
It was a really hot day, so they were looking for some water. They hopped around, couldn't find any, but finally they saw, Jonathan.
They saw a restaurant that was open just for them. Finally, they could go into and have a cool drink of water at this restaurant because the restaurants were finally open. Okay, end of story. You get the idea.
Yeah.
Another creative thing you can do as a family is write a poem together. So again, here we go, everybody. We'll start with Tammy this time. There lived a small cat who lived in a, Tammy, there lived a small cat who lived in a,
Hat.
Okay.
She's done. She's answered it. She's golden.
we won't take up the time and put Tammy in the spot, but you can write a poem with your family, and it doesn't need to be a rhyming poem, by the way, but just a continuation of the poem. One of the things that's really fun to do as a family, if your children like a certain story that ends at a certain point, ask them, let's write a story about what happened at the end of the story. What happened next? Let's extend the story. Or what happened to the rabbits before the story started, So it's the story before or after the story. Again, is a really fun family activity. Another thing that I developed as a Montessori teacher, and this is more about helping children look at their behavior options. I'm going to actually tell this as a story, and I know we're running on time here, so we're running out of time, so I'll be brief. So I had a group of children in my first Montessori class from 3 to 6-year-olds who were inveterate whiners. I'm sure you parents have a few children who occasionally whine. We all have whiners in our lives, adults and children. And these children are usually whining about their clothing being, I can't button my shirt, I can't tie my shoe. I got so sick of this. I came in one day and did the following, what we call reflective role play, to help children understand that they have different options. So I came in and my shoes were untied, and I said, children, let's pretend that I'm a very young person like yourself, and I haven't learned to tie my shoes yet. You can see my shoelaces are not tied. I wonder how I can get my shoes tied. Well, here's something I can do. And then I reached down and I fumbled around with my shoelaces and just sort of melted down with a hissy fit. So I ended up kind of like, oh, I can't tie my shoe. The children thought, of course, this was hysterically funny. And then I asked them 2 questions. How am I feeling now, children? Because we want the children to identify and talk about emotions. And children, is my shoe tied? No, Mr. Wolf, it's not. Well, here's something else I can do. I said, I'm not going outside today. I don't have a shoe tying problem. It'll be fine. I stood up, I tripped on my shoelace, and I fell on my face. And of course, then I started to cry. So again, I asked the children the same questions. How am I feeling now, children? They could identify, you're feeling hurt, Mr. Wolf, you're crying. Is my shoe tied? Then I turned to a 5-year-old. Let's say her name was Tammy. I said, my friend Tammy knows how to tie shoes. I think I'll ask for help. So I walked over to this 5-year-old and said, if you're not busy right now, could you help me tie my shoe? And Tammy very happily tied my shoe. And then I asked the children the same question. How am I feeling now? Is my shoe tied? But I didn't want to leave it at that. So I said, my friend Tammy ties my shoes every day at school, but one day she goes on vacation. And now my shoe is untied. What can I do? I want to learn to tie my own shoe. And I had a child bring me the Montessori dressing frame, the bow frame, and I had the child give me a lesson over about a 5-minute period in helping me tie shoes. And I practiced and I asked the child for another lesson because I wanted to demonstrate if you really want to learn something, keep asking for a lesson, keep persevering. I finally finished tying my shoes and the children had forgotten that I was an adult because they all went, Mr. They were all applauding me. And I asked the same questions again. How am I feeling now, children? And is my shoe tied? And who tied my shoes? So the idea of this is what's called reflective role play, helping children solve problems, whether it's the problem with the puzzle that they're playing with or their new toy, or a problem with their sibling. Help them role play out, or you role play out all the different responses that you could make in your behavior, and after each response that you theatrically role play with or without your children. With the younger children, the adults should do the role play. With elementary and older children, you can ask them, would you like to role play out what that might sound like? And after each role play, you ask the same questions. What emotions did you observe in yourself and others? What were people feeling? What were you feeling? And did you get what you wanted? Did you reach your goal? It's a really kind of a fun activity as a family because it's theatrical, but it's also critical thinking.
Yeah, I like it. So thanks for joining me, Margot, Tammy, and John, and everybody out there. We'll see you again next week.